All right. Well, good afternoon, friends from the Lewis Center for Church Leadership at Wesley Theological Seminary. It's my joy to welcome you to today's webinar being led by Reverend Dr. Lovett Weems around the right questions for church leaders. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to introduce myself because I'm new here. My name is Jonathan Page, and I am the brand new director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. I can tell you I'm new enough that I don't even have books on the shelf. I promise I'm slightly more well read than my background would would indicate. But it is a joy to be here with you all today, and a joy to be here with Dr. Weems as he shares this webinar. A couple of notes real quickly that the team asked me to introduce myself to you all, and so I want to do that.
Hmm?
You'll be seeing some things and leading ideas later this month from me.
No, that Zoom didn't
A
work.
couple of things that I would mention as we're getting going. The first is that uh, I'm just so honored and humbled by the opportunity to be engaged in the work of the Lewis Center. I'm really drawn to this work, and for a lot of reasons. The Lewis Center was founded in 2002 during my senior year of high school. I say that not to share anything about age, although if you can do the math, you might figure that out. What it means for me is that literally for my entire career, I've been using Lewis Center resources to guide my ministry as a pastor, as a youth leader, when I was a layperson, when I was discerning my call to ministry. The Lewis Center has been a major influence in my life, and I imagine that's a truth for a lot of us on this call, no matter how long ago or how recently you've encountered the resources of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. Uh, I think I would speak for most of us by saying the Lewis Center has been known for offering strategic, actionable insights that influence leadership amongst clergy, laity, and judicatories throughout the wider church connection throughout God's creation. And so, as I'm stepping into the role of the director, I'm excited to be leaning into where we've been and also where the church is being called moving forward as we enter into a continued space of being sort of post-pandemic. I'm a United Methodist. We've had some internal conflicts in the Methodist space over the last couple of years, and we see certainly, at least in the United States context, some conflicts around us, if not also in our global context. And thinking about what's the role of the church moving forward, three things I would highlight that I think we're going to be leaning into as the Lewis Center moves forward. One is that we are a future facing church that's requiring more collaborative leadership than ever before. I think we're very much moving beyond the era of the solo heroic leader and imagining how can we work together to influence the communities that we're a part of and the spaces that we're in. It's looking for collaboration more than competition. I think we're entering an era that requires intersectionality in leadership. So being mindful of our positionalities, whether that be related to race, gender, orientation, educational background, ability level, age, all sorts of different spaces, and looking for how we can be inclusive in all of those fronts and being mindful of the intersectionality that's required in leadership. And then that we are a community focused church now than ever before. There's a bank in this area in Washington, D.C. called Navy Federal Credit Union, and they have this tagline at the end of all of their advertisements that says, "Our members are our mission." And I wonder if our churches have fallen into that place from time to time where when we realize that our members are likely a part of the communities that we're serving, when we serve our communities, we are serving both our members and the people that aren't yet in the church. And so I'm excited to lean into how we do this. I'm a big believer that our past is an important part of who we are. But if you drive a car, I think of our past kind of like a rear view mirror, right? It's there to offer perspective, to offer aid and assistance. But the vision and the direction of where we're headed is the bigger picture and right in front of us. And so I'm excited to lean into this. Just a little bit about me. I come into the space with almost 2 decades of church leadership experience. I've served in churches as a layperson, as a youth pastor. After seminary, I was an associate pastor at a larger church for a number of years. I was a solo pastor of a new church start, then a solo pastor on a multi-clergy team of a larger legacy church in suburban Virginia. And then most recently, I served or I actually still am serving for another 2 weeks as the Director of Connection and Innovation in the Virginia Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, which is kind of like a hybrid of if you're from the United Methodist family, it's like a Director of Connectional Ministries meets a research and development kind of position and getting to lean into spaces of experimentation and connection all together. Educationally, I have a doctorate of education in EDD and organizational change and leadership from the University of Southern California. My research was focused on barriers that exist for people of color in the United Methodist ordination process and how to dismantle some of those. My Master of Divinity degree is from Duke Divinity School, and I also hold a BA in Modern Languages and Literatures from Christopher Newport University in Newport News, Virginia. I'm married to my wife, Kelly, who is a public school educator. I have a child named Alfred who's in his last year of preschool. So that's a lot of fun. And most of all, I'm just really excited to lean into this work and to get to know many of you who are on this call and to get to lean into how we might be engaged as the Lewis Center moving forward. So before I introduce Lovett, just a couple of housekeeping pieces. At the end of this presentation, we are going to have a question and answer session. So if you'd like to ask Dr. Weems a question, please type it into the chat box that's available for you. We are not going to be using the Zoom raise hand feature for this webinar, so just please use the chat. And also be mindful of your microphone. If you can stay muted, that would be awesome and help things out. Our moderators are going to help with that a little bit too. So enough about me, enough housekeeping. Let's get to the main event. It is good to be able to introduce today Reverend Dr. Lovett Weems, who is going to be leading today's webinar. Lovett is the founding director of the Lewis Center for Church Leadership. He is a senior consultant with our team. He is a legend in this field. I'm very humbled to be introducing him and working alongside him, and I hope you'll join me in giving him a warm welcome as he shares with us today. Lovett, it's good to see you.
Thank you so much, Jonathan, and welcome to everyone who's participating today. It's great to be with you. And we are so pleased that Jonathan is our new director at the center and look forward to his leadership. In the session today, I'm going to use material and questions in addition, but beyond what's in the book, The Right Questions for Church Leaders, that came out earlier this year, so that you might get additional benefit from this, even if you have the book. So let's begin with the point one. Questions can change your leadership perspective. This whole session is looking at how can questions and becoming very adept at asking the right questions improve my effectiveness and fruitfulness as a leader. And when I talk about a changed leadership perspective, I'm thinking about moving from an inside to outside way of thinking to an outside to inside way of thinking. Let me illustrate with this next slide. You're probably familiar with these types of prescription bottles. Now, these bottles have labels that were designed with an inside to outside way of thinking. That is, the decision is made, we ought to design some labels for the bottles. What would we most like to say? And you will notice that the most prominent thing there is the name of the pharmacy. And also you'll find on there in much smaller print what the medicine is and what the directions are. This next slide shows an example of labels done from an outside to inside way of thinking. That is, you don't start by saying, what do we want these labels to be? We start by saying, who will be using these labels? What are their questions? When they look at the label, what will they be most looking for? And so you'll notice here that the name of the medicine and the directions are the most prominent things there. And the name of the pharmacy is also there. Now, in the church, we typically do inside to outside leading. For example, if we want to have studies during the Lenten season, we will come up with the number of the studies and what they are and who's going to lead them. And then we will go from inside to outside. We're going to offer these 3 wonderful courses with these 3 outstanding leaders. And I hope that everyone hearing this will sign up for one of these courses before you leave today. Now, if I'm sitting in the pew, that could sound to me like the church would like for me to do something for you, for them. Now, here's what it might look like if that leader was practicing outside to inside thinking with a different set of right questions. So you're going to have studies during Lent. So you begin not with what are we going to offer, but you begin with who are the people that we know will be there, whatever the studies are. And then who are some other people we really hope will attend? And then who are some others that may be there? Now, what's on their minds these days? What are their questions? What are their points of struggle? And then when you present that, you present it in a different way. You're able to say, we're going into the Lenten season, and that's a time when every one of us will be giving special attention to where we are on our spiritual pilgrimage. And you would expect your church to offer ways to help you take your next faithful step on your discipleship journey. Well, in thinking about this Lenten season, we've come up with some offerings, and if any one of these will be of help to you, we want you to know they are available. Some of you have said, for example, I love my Sunday school class, but sometimes I just like to go a little deeper. Well, we're going to have a study on the book of Romans that will be just right for you. But you know, there are others in our congregation who often say, I didn't grow up in the church. I don't know the Bible. If you want me to find something in the Bible, give me a page number. Well, we have Bible 101 for you. And then we're offering a third study. Many of you have noted how much loss there's been in our community in the last year, from deaths, illness, people leaving, unemployment. We're having a study on dealing with loss from a Christian perspective. Now, these are available. If any one of them will help you take your next faithful step, we hope you will take advantage of them. And if you have friends or relatives or neighbors who may have interest, they are welcome as well. Now, if I'm sitting in the pew of that church, what I'm hearing is very different. I'm hearing that the church is concerned about my next faithful step, and they're offering some resources. And if they do not really apply to me, I don't have to feel guilty about not participating. Now let's go to a second way that questions can help us. Questions help keep mission and outcomes uppermost. You know, one way we can do that always is to say, in essence, to people, you know, I really care about the mission more than any of you do. So why don't you get with the program a little more? That never works. You always assume the best until people prove you otherwise. You assume that others care as much about the mission as you do. So let me give you two examples about how questions can help. Let's take someone who's chair of the
Yeah,
Children's
keep going.
Council,
That's okay.
and
That's fine.
that person is getting ready for a monthly meeting. This chair has been doing this for a few years. Uh, there are minutes from the last meeting telling what the issues left over were. Uh, there are some other calls that have come in, some things. So you start preparing an agenda. And the agenda is there's a newly renovated classroom. We've got to decide which class gets to move into it. We have a request from an adult class that's on the second floor wanting to move to a classroom on the first floor, which means it will a children's classroom will have to move. Nursery workers are asking for an increase in their hourly pay that they want us to recommend to the finance committee. It's about that time of the year to pick a director for Vacation Bible School for the summer. And that's typically what the agenda has looked like month after month. But deep down, you know, as chair of the Children's Council, this is not really what you're about. It's not what you're about any more than turning off the lights when you leave the room after the meeting is. Sure, you're going to do it, but you're not going to spend all your time talking about how we're going to get the lights turned off. You're simply going to do it. So how then do you put these details in a larger context? So in this case, the chair of the Children's Council says to those who have gathered, thank you for coming. I'm honored to have the opportunity to be chair of the Children's Council. And we have a full agenda tonight, and we'll get to those items that you see on the agenda. But as we begin, I'd like to ask you to share some of the wisdom that God's put on your heart about our ministry. Because with all these details we have to deal with, we know in the end, we're about something greater than that. And so I've put up 2 sheets of newsprint. And on each, I've got a question. And I will take notes as you share from your wisdom. And the first question is this: what does every parent who puts a child under the ministry of this congregation have a right to expect from us? And so there's a discussion, and a long list is made. And then the chair turns to the second question. When a child enters our children's ministry and moves through it and then ages out, what do we hope that God will have done in each of their lives? And again, there's a time for discussion and taking notes. You see, what the Children's Council chair has done is to remind everyone this is what we're really about. And incidentally, we have these other things we have to do, and we also turn the lights out when we leave the room. Or let's take an example of a congregational vision or new mission. Let's say one congregation has, in their planning process, they have come to realize that their church has, for 30 years, been growing older in terms of the average age of the congregation. And so out of that comes a vision of reaching younger people. Now, here's a second church. Out of their analysis, they realized that while their church started as a neighborhood church years ago, now no one of the members lives in the neighborhood, and they really don't even know who their neighbors are. And so their vision becomes reconnecting with our neighborhood. Now, the typical way that churches would address this would be to set up some task group. Maybe find some people who are not on other things, get them on a task group, and say in the first case, say to the group, go find some young people. And to the second group, find a way to engage our neighbors. And you may even give them some money in the budget. That rarely works. But instead, what if instead of having a separate group, you simply have the right question? You ask every ministry group in the congregation, as they make their plans for the next year, will you make those plans with this question in mind? How can we make plans so that it is more likely that we are serving a somewhat younger constituency a year from now as we are now? So there'll be some resistance. The trustees are going to say, we don't do program, we do bricks and mortar, or the music group may say, we thought we were about music, now you're asking us to do something else. But simply have them ask that question. So take with the trustees. It turns out that the trustees became fairly engaged with that issue. They realized they had not even checked out the facilities that are used by children and youth in a long time. And so they started doing a tour. And as soon as they walked into the nursery, one of the influential trustees said, no grandchild of mine is coming in here because of the condition of the room. There were several doors that people could enter and leave from. There was like peeling paint on the wall. So all of a sudden, the trustees who thought they had nothing to contribute are contributing many things to that. Or in the music ministry, it turns out that they had been talking about a children's choir for a long time. Well, this was the year that we will do it. So what happens is that question spread over all the ministry areas results in things where what one group does by itself is not going to make a difference. But the synergy of all of those efforts really will make it likely that the church will reach a younger constituency in the next year. The third point, questions provide free consultation services. This is really what made a believer out of me in Right Questions. But I was relatively young. I was appointed to a larger church in Mississippi, and I had grown up in a small country church on a 3-point charge. Had served smaller churches, and so I was at first a little overwhelmed. But I decided I needed to listen before speaking, so I spent the first summer in 35 small groups, but I knew I had to ask the right questions, and fortunately I did. There were just 2 questions. The first was, I said, you've got an amazing church here. I'm really going to have to pick up my level of functioning to hang on here. But everything I see is so impressive, but you know this church so much better than I do. So tell me, with all our church has going for it, where are we vulnerable? And usually there'd be a little gap, and then someone would say, well, there are not many young people. Okay, I'd say thank you. I'd heard of somebody else say, do you agree with that? They'd say yes, and we'd continue the conversation. The second question was, some of you have lived here all of your lives. Every one of you has lived here longer than I have. So you need to help me with this question. Knowing this community and its people as you do, when we gather for worship on Sunday, who's missing? And there'd be a little longer gap there. And then some brave soul would speak up and give a response. And I would turn to someone else, often calling them by name, and say, is that true? And they would nod or say yes. And we would have a conversation. Those were the 2 questions all summer. Well, what that did was set the agenda. And it turned out that it was about children and younger people and about diversity and inclusion. And it made all the difference in the world. Now, there's some all-purpose questions that you always want to keep in mind that can be used, such as, what is so good about our church that you hope it never changes? What if you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about our church? What would you change? If you left today and didn't come back for 5 years, what would you most hope to find when you return? Tell me about your church when it's at its very best. Recently, a pastor at the end of the worship service held up the church bulletin and said, our church wants to offer worship that is meaningful for everyone. And so if there's any word in the bulletin today that you didn't understand, will you please circle it? If there's any part of the service that was confusing to you, would you circle it? Or if there's something else that you were not clear about, would you write a note in the bulletin and then drop them in the box at the back? That's ingenious. People pay thousands of dollars for that kind of consulting help, and it's available to you all the time. When I was a seminary president, I would meet with students, um, small groups of students once a week. And there were two questions. The first was, what is so good that you hope it will remain when other students come later? And then halfway through, we shifted to what would make it better, what would make things better. And we lost count after hundreds of changes that came about uh, just from those kinds of things. Now, what do you do with the results? You look for clues. You don't simply make a list and count up things. You look for clues. What's not being said? What is being said? What is it that they're really getting at that you most need to know? Now let's turn to point 4. Questions help for things for which we do not have expertise. Let's take online worship, for example. Almost all of us had to get familiar with online worship during the pandemic. And for some, it really played to their interest. And for others, it was a burden. Most churches are continuing online worship now, as they should. But you may be a person who really, you don't understand much about that. And there are pastors and worship team leaders who their main concern is someone taking care of that? Did it work this week? So in that case, you need to find a church that's doing online worship well and talk to someone there and say, what are the 2 or 3 key questions I should always be asking about our online worship? Are there some metrics that I ought to be paying attention to? Or take finances. At Wesley Seminary, we offer 3 courses dealing with money, and it's personal finance for religious professionals, healthy stewardship in congregations, and church finances. When I teach the church finances course, immediately half the students will say, I don't deal with money. I that's something that's out of my realm. But what I say to them is, as a leader, unless you learn some basics, you're always going to be at the mercy of someone else, and you never want to be at the mercy of someone else. So if finances is a challenge for you, you need to determine some key questions that are always important in the finances of a congregation. So you might go into a new church as pastor or as a new member of a finance committee, and you would say, how much of our operating income comes from recurring and predictable income? And the answer may be, well, 100%. Well, that's the end of that conversation. You're in good shape. But if it's not, okay, well, what are the other sources? What's the history of those? How much money is left in those? Or the church has an endowment. What's the spending rate? Well, the leaders may not know. Well, you say, well, why don't you go back and calculate it for the last 3 years or so? That is, what percent are we spending compared to the value of the endowment at the beginning of the year? And then you're able to ask, well, is our spending rate conservative enough that we're able to plow back the rate of inflation so that we're not devaluing the endowment? Those are some examples. Our social media. Some leaders are very much into social media, others aren't. Well, if you aren't, then find a church that has a very solid social media ministry, and ask someone there that knows, what are a few questions I should be asking of our social media ministry? And are there a few metrics that I ought to be keeping in mind for that? And then a fifth point, questions are helpful for things when we're caught off guard by these unexpected suggestions, questions, criticism, advice, requests. They happen all the time, don't they? And usually in an awkward situation. Somebody with 100 people in line behind them after church says, why is it we never do such and such? Or someone comes up, what always really was tough for me as a pastor, just before you're going into worship, there's someone tugging on your sleeve with some question. I never handle those very well. And then there's the criticism, the suggestions. What I encourage leaders to do is you need to have some questions at your fingertips that can help you learn more. You see, our tendency might be just to immediately respond based on what we think they're saying or think they're asking. It could be someone saying, well, Pastor, we ought to have a children's sermon. And so you might say, well, that's a good idea. Let me work on it this week. Or you may be a different pastor and you say, well, as long as I'm pastor here, there won't be a children's sermon. You'll notice we don't have a fat people sermon. We don't have a tall people sermon. We don't have a children's sermon. Well, but neither of those responses is probably very good. First of all, you got to have a way uh, to find where there is some time. But let's say there is some time. You'd say, well, what makes you say that? Well, last Sunday we visited our daughter and son-in-law and grandchildren, and they had a children's service. Okay, tell me about it. How long did it last? What did the kids say about it? And then you can say, well, you're not the first person that's made that suggestion. We've talked about in worship, and there are different points of view. But I'd love to take your suggestion with your permission to our committee. Or uh, again, uh, what makes you say that, or with who else should I be talking to? Have things like that. Um, a woman came up to me just before church one Sunday and said, Lovett, you finally did what I told you to do. And I said, ma'am, I don't know what you're talking about. You tell me so much to do. I can't keep it straight. And she just burst into laughter and said, that's exactly what my kids say about me. Well, you've been there a while. Humor can help you some way. But it may be that, would you like for me to pass that along to the chair of our trustees? I'd be happy to do that. Someone comes up and says, Pastor, our church needs a singles ministry. Well, in the past, if that's something that we were interested in, we'd say, hey, great, let's do it. But otherwise, we might not. Now you could say, well, why don't you and some of your friends get together and complete the sentence? Our church will begin a singles ministry so that. And the conclusion after so that is, what would you anticipate would be different in the lives of singles a year from now, of our church a year from now, of our community a year from now, if we had a singles ministry? Again, have some of those things in mind so you at least buy time, if nothing else. And then there's one other point I'd make before our questions. Questions help decide what is most essential for you to do. I like to think of there being a calling that goes with any leadership position. It could be the position of pastor. It could be music minister. It could be youth director. It could be ball team coach. It could be anything. And the way you get at your calling is to ask this question: what do the the people God has given me in this ministry setting, what do they have a right to expect of me, so that if I don't do it, no one else can, or in all likelihood will do it. Let me use an example of a leadership role of parent. A parent could say, what kind of parent do I want to be? Some might look at it legalistically. They might say, I want to know, what does the law say I have to do? And what does it say I can't do? But most of us would come at it another way. Some of us might say, well, I want to be the parent that I've always thought a great parent would be. Or others of us may be saying, I want to emulate a parent I had, or the parent of one of my buddies growing up. Or somebody else might say, I want to be the opposite of an example of a parent that I've experienced. But you see, the problem is all of these things start with me. But again, it's outside the inside. The question for a parent would be, what do my children have a right to expect of me, so that if I don't do it, no one else can, or in all likelihood will do it? That's a very different question. So if you're a pastor, you say, what do the people God has given me in this congregation have a right to expect of me, so that if I don't do it, no one else can, or in all likelihood will? That's not saying what do they want. It's what do they have a right to expect. If I were a member of this church, what would I have a right to expect? And then that becomes our starting point. So the starting point's not our ideas, our preferences, what we enjoy doing the most. What do people have a right to expect? If someone is a music director, what do the choirs and this congregation and the leaders of the congregation have a right to expect of me as a music director or a youth director? What do the youth, the parents of the youth, and this congregation have a right to expect of me as youth director, that if I don't do it, no one else can, or in all likelihood will? When I was a seminary president, I'd be evaluated by a committee of the Board of Trustees every year. So picture this kind of evaluation going on, and the seminary president might say, when they say, well, tell us about the year and what you've done. Well, I've spent most of my time with students. I believe that's what a seminary is all about. I teach them, I meet with them, I help them with their problems, I counsel them. I just think that's what we're all about. And the committee might then go on to say, well, tell us a bit about what you've done in identifying new trustees. What have you done in identifying new donors? What have you done with church leaders in the region in the last year? Well, like I said, I think students are everything. And so that's where I've spent my time. And then the committee would have a right to say, well, that's commendable, but you're not the dean of students. Um, in essence, you have a calling, and a lot of it's captured in your job description. But then they might say, if they were talking to me, they might say, well, Lovett, don't think for a minute that we think you're the only person that can be president. But as long as you're in that position, you're the only president we have. And so we have a right to expect that of you. Now, if you step aside, we'll be happy to find someone else. But as long as you're in that position, so it's true for a seminary president, it's true for a Sunday school teacher. What does my class have a right to expect of me that if I don't do it, no one else can or in likelihood will? There may be several people in that Sunday school class who could be a great teacher, but that's not going to happen unless they have the calling. They don't have the calling. You have the calling. So um, these are 6 points. Now, let's turn to our question time and see um, what you might be interested in knowing more about.
Hi,
I'll
Doc.
pursue more.
Hi, Dr. Weems. I have a great question here. You spoke about being caught off guard by the unexpected. Could you suggest a go-to question to ask when there is criticism?
Yeah. What makes you say that? Um, what uh, uh, what would you have expected? Um, one thing I always try to keep in mind is whether it's a phone call or an email or someone's asking me a question or you're in a committee meeting. If fair-minded people were looking on, would they say what I said or did was reasonable? For some people, uh, whatever you say is not going to be enough. The key is you don't want to do more damage. You certainly don't want to do anything that if somebody's overhearing it or if it's repeated accurately will make you look smaller. So that's why I think you need ways to keep that conversation going. Tell me more, help me understand that. Um, well, lots of people are saying that. Well, help me know who to talk to. Um, and maybe even let me think about that and get back to you. But uh, clergy don't get really helpful feedback as much as they need it, but it's not because they don't get criticized and get talked about, but you just have to find a way not to be defensive and to not let it throw you uh, because it will come to you in ways that are designed to hook you.
Those are some great suggestions, Dr. Weems. Thank you. Another question. What are some ways I can use right questions during a sermon?
Oh, well, let's thinking about the inside to outside thinking, outside to inside thinking. If in a sermon, if you are preaching inside to outside, your sermon will probably begin something like this. I will submit that the scripture lesson today makes 3 key points for Christian living, something like that. If you're outside to inside thinking, you're going to start with something like, has there ever been a time in your life when such and such happened? Now, the sermon may be the same, uh, but you're coming at it in a very different way. So there are a lot of things that you can convert to questions that that point a direction, um, and uh, without having to uh, are you, sometimes you said, I've found myself asking the question, or for a long time when I was asked this question, and you're letting people know that it's okay to have changed a position or okay to be thinking about something. It's not everyone has that opinion. So those would be a few things that come to mind.
Likewise, someone writes, our church hosts an annual fall festival. For next year, how might we use outside to inside thinking in the planning stages?
Okay, uh, great. Well, I would, first of all, I would do a good so that statement. Each year we have a fall festival, so that, and find out what the purpose of it is. That, because that's got to guide everything. But then you say, well, who always comes to the fall festival? And then who are the people we'd really like to come? And if it was really successful, who are some folks that would be there? And what's on their mind? What are their interests? Um, what's important to them? Because otherwise, those planning it will start with either what's familiar or what they're most interested in, and it can uh, it can make a big difference.
Thank you. Another question, Dr. Weems. How would you further distinguish between wise and thoughtful expectations from congregants and leaders versus expectations that are coming too much from their own personal trauma narratives? This question comes from a place as a clergy person who is accosted consistently by by congregants' opinions about what they think I should be doing versus how I understand my calling as a leader in their midst.
Well, I think that's why I'm thinking of calling in a little different way. It's not totally personal. For instance, here's what I would think about. Draw three interlocking circles. And one of them would be your calling from God. And I think that's what's being referred to there, is what I see as my calling. That's one circle. But then there's a calling of the congregation in terms of what's going on and what the needs are at this particular moment in history. And then um, there's the calling of the community, the context in which you serve, uh, and so it's that it's not pitting things against one another. Another three circles could be your one circle is your own values and hopes and dreams. A second is the hopes and dreams and values of the congregation. And the third would be of your theological tradition, your denomination. And where you want to lead from is where those three circles intersect. And that will be something that is consistent with your values, with the congregation values, with your traditions values. Now, that if you do that, it makes it more possible, for instance, for you as the leader to do some things that fall outside that intersection. And they'll say, well, let's just love it. But it's not all they ever hear. And you'll be more you'll be happier to help with the homecoming, though it's not your cup of tea, because that's not the only thing we're dealing with. Or there'll be something kind of goes with the denomination that nobody gets that excited about, but it's not all you're hearing about. So you want to lead. And sometimes people will have within a congregation, they may have three different uh, constituencies. And again, do those circles, put all the words that represent their values and characteristics and find where it comes together in the center, lead from there, and then people will be more tolerant of the things that don't fall outside that. Find what you have in common first and play that note over and over.
Uh, Dr. Weems, do you have strategies for whom to approach with questions who may not be active in the church? Are there specific leaders or positions to focus on in communities?
Well, um, questions are a great way to approach. You can approach people that aren't active, or you can have other people to approach them, or um, I mean, you can even invite people who are not a part of the church. Would you? We're trying to get a more objective picture of what our church is like. Would you be willing to attend our church one Sunday and then complete a few open-ended questions or a survey or something? Um, or you can say to folks, um, I know one district superintendent asked every church in her district at their charge conference to, uh, over the next 6 weeks, I'd like for each of you to talk to 3 high school students. There are almost no youth in the district churches. I'd like for you to talk to 3 youth. It can be a neighbor, it can be a relative, you can rent one, whatever. But here are these 3 questions, and then come back and talk as a group about it. Let me know what you learned. Well, the conversation people had was most important. Or you can, if you don't have many youth, have the 1 or 2 you do have. Say, would you invite some of your friends and come and do some reverse mentoring for us? That is, just answer some questions uh, and then make sure you're not defensive or anything. Um, you, uh, but I always encourage people to find at least some wise person or persons. There's usually 1, maybe 2 in a congregation who may have their own opinions. But if you go to them and say, could you just be a kind of consultant for me for a moment? Uh, they'll say, well, sure. And you say, it may just be my imagination, but is X, Y, or Z going on here? And they may say, well, I hadn't thought about it. Let me check around. Or they may say, oh, I know what you're talking about. But you need these people, you go to them. So instead of going to them and giving your interpretation of what's going on, you go and ask them a question. But you're always uh, uh, do a video of your service and see if you can get a few people to look at it and make some suggestions for where there could be improvements. Um, just get into a mindset. It's not so much what the question is, but a mindset of how do we constantly ask so we can learn from others.
Dr. Weems, I know we're pushing up against 1 o'clock, but I have a question I think a lot of people will want to know some of your thoughts on. The question goes, some of our programs are led by longtime faithful people who are ready to stop, but no one is picking up the mantle to continue them. These faithful people are so frustrated that no one wants to keep those things going. Do you have any questions you'd offer to assist in the conversation to help those people let go without so much resentment?
Oh gosh, all of us know that story well. I was just reading the other day about a, a church where they encourage their volunteers to have second careers. That is, at some point along the line, uh, take on a different type of ministry. But in this case, you're describing there, I know it well. um, um, they maybe you work with them and some others to do a so that statement for that ministry. We do this ministry so that, and figure out what the outcome is that you're seeking, and is this the best way to do that outcome? Uh, Ask them if there's anyone they know that they might mentor into that situation. But somehow it may be that ministry has to be reframed to uh, to come another way and say, if you feel that you need to pass this on, then we want to say thank you to you, and we want to appoint a group to begin looking at how to carry on this ministry. Uh, so I think that's about what comes to my mind. But I'd encourage anybody, if you have questions of me along the way, um, my email will be on the document that comes to you. It's lovettw@wesleyseminary.edu. You can get it from the Lewis Center website. Feel free to send me uh, questions along. I'm happy to be in dialogue with you, and thank you everyone for the opportunity to be with you today. And I hope you find this webinar as well as the book helpful for you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Weems. I know I speak for everyone when I say that our ministries will benefit greatly from this information. Next slide, please. Before we conclude, I'd like to mention some resources to help you guide you in leading your churches. If you'd like to learn more about more right questions, Dr. Weems' book, The Right Questions for Church Leaders, is available from Abingdon Press, Cokesbury, and Amazon. And I've typed the link in the chat box. Also, we encourage you to subscribe free to our weekly e-newsletter, Leading Ideas, and our podcast, Leading Ideas Talks. The links are also in the chat. Next slide, please. Your feedback helps us build better webinars. Please complete a brief evaluation at churchleadership.com/evaluation. We truly value and appreciate your thoughts. And also, later today, you will receive an email with the presentation slides, chat, and video. Next slide, please. From all of us at the Lewis Center for Church Leadership of Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C., thank you so much for attending. We know your time is valuable, and we sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share this information with you. Blessings to you and all that you do.